Welcome to the fourth installment, Valentine's Day edition of This Day in History here on the Good Mike Work channel. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you. This is the stupidest fucking day in the history of planet Earth. I hate it. But I do remember enjoying one Valentine's Day, and that was in 1999 when the WWE had a pay-per-view fall on that night. They did away with the No Way Out name for 1 year and replaced it with St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And I want to talk a little bit about this pay-per-view, particularly one match, actually one bump. Because Vince McMahon took one of the most hellacious table bumps I've ever seen off of the top of that cage that night. Absolutely unbelievable from a guy of his age to fall the way he did. He's lucky he didn't fucking die. The backstory on the cage match, all of you know, of course, Vince McMahon and Stone Cold had been feuding for about a year by this point. Vince McMahon actually won the Royal Rumble about a month before this and pulled a whole bunch of shady tricks to ensure that Stone Cold would not win his third straight Royal Rumble and ended up earning himself a title match at WrestleMania. The very next night on Raw, in one of the funniest WWE Raw segments ever, Vince McMahon comes out and basically says he has no interest in main eventing WrestleMania. He just wanted to fuck with Stone Cold. So he forfeits his opportunity to wrestle for the title at WrestleMania. And immediately on the Titantron, Stone Cold shows up and it looks like he's at somebody's house. And he reveals that person's house to be Shawn Michaels, who was acting as the commissioner during that time and who had recently turned babyface. And basically what they do is Shawn states that since Vince McMahon has forfeited his opportunity to wrestle for the title at WrestleMania, that it states in the rule book that if that happens and if the person that wins the Royal Rumble forfeits their shot, that the runner-up automatically becomes the new number one contender. So Stone Cold, just like that, within a snap of a finger, is now the number one contender the night after the Royal Rumble. And this is something that I wish the WWE would remember that they have actually done. The reason I'm pretty sure that they even had this angle to begin with, and the reason that Vince McMahon won the Royal Rumble, is because it was very predictable. Stone Cold was on fire. He was on top of the world. He had already won the previous two Royal Rumbles, and you knew just by the way things were going after Survivor Series and The Rock won the title that it was most likely going to be Stone Cold and The Rock at WrestleMania. So Stone Cold was your obvious pick to win the Royal Rumble, and I think they went with the McMahon swerve just to throw the fans off, and then they rectified it the very next night on Raw and made Austin the number one contender anyway. And I don't know if you guys can find that Raw. I was watching it just a little while ago and I was cracking up. Stone Cold and Shawn Michaels were fucking hammered. That's right, on live TV they were both wasted. Shawn, you got to remember, back then he was into pills and drugs and booze and all of that. Stone Cold, I think they were legitimately at Shawn's house. Austin was completely red in the face. They even joked on camera. Shawn Michaels showed an empty bottle of Jack Daniels, sitting on camera right there. I mean, those two guys were hammered. I actually thought they might get in a little bit of trouble for that. I mean, when you watch it, Austin is stumbling over his words. He's really red-faced. He's just not himself. And the two of them obviously were drinking all night. So Austin then goes on to tell Vince that, you know what, since I'm the number one contender now for WrestleMania, I don't really give a shit about that match either. All I want is you. All I want is your ass. So I will put up my number one contender spot in my title match at WrestleMania. I'll put it on the line at the next pay-per-view if you'll face me in a match, a cage match. The WWE title is also defended at St. Valentine's Day Massacre, but Austin McMahon in the cage is your main event. If Austin wins, he goes on to face the WWE champion at WrestleMania. If he loses a shot altogether. McMahon actually accepts the challenge, and there you go. The main event is set. I remember not being completely thrilled with it because I'm thinking to myself, still Vince, even though he's horrible in the ring, I love the chemistry with him and Austin. I did not mind them in the ring together sometimes and having fights and brawls and all of that, but now we're talking about a main event of a pay-per-view, Vince McMahon being in this high profile of a match. I did not think that this match was going to translate well, and Vince took a page out of Mick Foley's book. Mick Foley did the same thing at the Hell in the Cell. He knew that he was going in there with The Undertaker, who was also injured, had a bad ankle or a bad leg or something, and they were really worried that the match was going to suck. So to make up for that, that's when Mick Foley took the fucking swan dive off the top of the cage. And Vince McMahon kind of did the same thing. The match didn't even get started. They come out for their match. Vince, I don't think, will let Austin in the cage. They end up brawling on the outside of the cage, I think even into the crowd. They brawl for a good 10 minutes, and then finally Vince starts to climb up the cage to get in it. Austin follows him up, and in one of the most unbelievable bumps I've ever seen, takes Vince's head, smacks it on the top of the cage, and Vince literally bounces and flies backwards a good 10 feet in order to make this table spot. He really had to spring himself off of the cage to make sure he would even hit the table, and he hit the table so horribly wrong. You know, when a lot of those guys go through that, right in the middle there, right in between the two announcers, that's that sweet spot that's not, that doesn't have a ton of support underneath it, and it can actually maybe help break your fall more than hurt your fall. But Vince didn't do that. He hit it right on the spine of that table, landing right on his back on the edge, on the solid fucking wooden edge, and you just see his whole head and neck snap back. You thought Vince McMahon broke every bone in his body. How he was even able to walk after this, I have no idea. That could have ended a lot worse than it did. Vince is lucky he didn't get paralyzed. He had already had neck and back problems in his life already. He had already had a surgery or two, years before this, and he's taken a bump like that in his condition at his age. It's just like he wanted to prove himself. If he's going to go out there and take up a main event spot, he wants to damage himself just as much as any of the other boys will. You have to respect that about Vince McMahon. This is a guy that at the time was on the verge of becoming a billionaire. How many billionaires do you know that would do that to their bodies? That's one part of Vince McMahon's incredibly demonic personality that you have to respect. A lot of guys have said that over the years. He doesn't even want his wrestlers to do anything that he wouldn't do. Remember WrestleMania 12 when Shawn did the zip line thing down to the ring? Vince did it first. I wish Vince would have given the Blue Blazer thing a try. Maybe they could have realized there was a problem and the whole thing could have been avoided. But still, Vince, tends to really put himself out there if he's going to get in the ring and if he's going to perform. He does not half-ass it at all. And that bump he took, man, it was unbelievable. And just like that, almost immediately, the match goes from potentially sucking to being very, very dramatic. Now, Vince is completely out of it. They bring out the paramedics, the gurney, they put the neck brace on him, and they just start wheeling his completely broken ass out of there, just like they did Mick Foley at the Hell in the Cell. Austin gets on the mic and says, the match never even started. We never even got in this ring. I guaranteed that I was going to basically kill this motherfucker, and I want to make good on these guarantees, and I'm not going to let the match end like that. He throws the microphone down and runs out to the aisle as the doctors are wheeling Vince McMahon away. He fights off the doctors, grabs the stretcher, and wheels it full speed right back into the ring and tips it over and dumps Vince right on his ass, right against the ring apron, and he's just a mess. Vince looks legitimately destroyed by this point. Austin gets him in the ring finally and just beats the ever-loving shit out of him. This match was basically 98% Stone Cold offense. Vince had very, very little offense at all. He just took an ass kicking during this. And Austin, just when I think he hits him with a stunner or whatever he does to finally incapacitate Vince in the middle of the ring, starts to walk out the cage door, and then Vince does the classic, double bird, flips off Austin, just goading him back in the ring. So Austin walks right back in, kicks Vince's ass some more, throws him against the cage. By this point, Vince is busted open, hits him with another Stone Cold stunner, and starts to leave the cage again, and then Vince is just sitting there, and one of my favorite shots of him just crying with blood all over his face, shooting the double bird at Austin, just begging him to get back in the ring and finish him off. Austin comes back in again, and I think Vince might have even done it one more time. It was 2 or 3 times that Austin basically had the match won, and Vince, just still ever defiant after the ass kicking he's taken, he is still provoking Stone Cold. And it was all done for a reason, because he had a trick up his sleeve, and one of the biggest coups for the WWE, finally the tables have officially turned. Now you got major talent from the other side showing up in WWE. Paul White, the Giant, cuts a hole through the ring, comes up through the middle of the ring, and attacks Stone Cold in order to help Vince McMahon. This was a big night for the WWE. They had really not grabbed a major star from WCW yet, because the tide was already turning. The WWE had already taken over, and they were not going to be looking back at WCW. But still, a lot of the big stars were still in WCW, and WWE had only taken, 1 or 2 mid-card guys. Now you got a guy like the Giant, a guy that was WCW's Undertaker. He was going to be the guy I thought that they were going to build as their unstoppable monster in the company. When Big Show was young, he could do some amazing things in the ring for a guy his size. He was unbelievable, and I think, things didn't work out for him in WCW just because of the chaos there and the politics and all of that, and he thought, he'd be much more marketable and make a lot more money in the WWE. I knew at the time that they were bringing him in. I knew when he was still in WCW, when they were jobbing him out, that he was heading to the WWE. You just didn't know when he was going to debut. So him showing up in this match, I thought for sure, I'm like, oh shit, he's going to cost Stone Cold the match. And that actually didn't happen. The Giant attacks Austin, but when he throws him against the cage gives way, and Austin falls out and lands. It's pretty smart booking. They had a way to debut the Giant or the Big Show in a major way, in a major main event, but still were able to keep Austin in the main event at WrestleMania at the same time. I actually kind of think, looking back, that they should have debuted him maybe in the Rock and Mankind feud, because that would have been the better place for him, because he would go on to wrestle Mankind, I think, at WrestleMania. And Austin was going to be locked in his feud with The Rock and Vince McMahon, so Paul White, interfering in this match with Austin, I didn't think really made any sense. I think they should have used Paul White to interfere and make his debut during the Mankind Rock match, which I think would happen the next night on Raw. At St. Valentine's Day Massacre, just to get off track here just for a second, I'm just trying to get my timeline straight, but Mankind was WWE champion. He defended the title at this pay-per-view against The Rock. The match ended in a draw. I'm pretty sure the next night on Raw or the week after, they did a ladder match, and Paul White ended up helping The Rock win back the WWE title. If you ask me, that's where Paul White should have debuted. They should have debuted him on Monday Night Raw, not on St. Valentine's Day Massacre, if they were going to have Austin just win the match anyway. Austin could have just beat the shit out of Vince, and that could have been the end of it. And then the next night on Raw, when you're going head-to-head with Nitro in a live TV environment, have the Big Show debut, and show the world that a WCW guy just showed up on your TV show. So that might have been the way I would have done it, but still, a pretty significant night, and Paul White debuting the way he did. And it's so funny to go back and listen to Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler, who would both lost their voices during this pay-per-view. They both sounded horrible on commentary. And when Paul White comes up through the ring, Michael Cole is just screaming, "It's Paul White! It's Paul White!" When nobody knows him as Paul White. They know him as the Giant, but they couldn't say the Giant. So it's just kind of funny how Michael Cole was screaming, "Paul White, Paul White." And it took him a couple of weeks, I think, to figure out and settle on the name Big Show. I actually, believe it or not, did not hate the Giant gimmick or the Giant character. I really didn't like that they were portraying him as Andre the Giant's son. That part I didn't like. But just calling him the Giant, I thought was simple, straight to the point, and basically told the story of who this guy is. He is a fucking giant. He doesn't have over-the-top charisma. He's just a giant ass kicker with a very, very simple name. Kind of like The Undertaker, the Giant. The fucking Giant. I liked it. I wish they could have used it, or maybe they would have had to call him A Giant, or, Big Giant, or something like that. But anyway, he turned out to be the Big Show, had a hell of a career in the WWE, and this is where it all started. I even remember the dirt sheet reports after he debuted that WWE signed him to a 10-year deal. That was huge for that time, for WWE to invest that much money. They knew that grabbing him from WCW was huge for them, and they wanted to lock him up and make sure he was going to be with them forever. And it's amazing that 10-year contract ended and he signed another one. I think he took a year or two off from WWE during a short time, but, he's been there for many, many years. Mark Henry also signed a 10-year deal when he first came in 1996. So there's been a couple of those long deals from the WWE, but you haven't seen many contracts, that have been that long. All in all, it was a good pay-per-view, and the main event really delivered, because for the time that it was during the Attitude Era, when everything was so violent, the way Austin absolutely beat the shit out of Vince, he's covered in blood, a disgusting-looking table spot that almost killed Vince McMahon. Combine that with a WCW defection, the Giant showing up on WWE to help Vince McMahon. It was all in all a very, I think, successful and memorable show. I remember watching this that evening. My girlfriend at the time was not happy that I was spending Valentine's Day watching a WWE pay-per-view, but I didn't give a fuck. I hate Valentine's Day. But anyway, feel free to leave me your memories of this pay-per-view, and particularly that match between Stone Cold and Vince McMahon inside the steel cage. It was cool. The cage was black. They even painted the cage black. It was that old blue bar steel cage that the WWE would use during the 90s, but great time in the business. I miss these days in the Attitude Era terribly. Can you believe it's been 16 years since this match took place? Time is just flying by. But thanks for sticking around and revisiting with me a very memorable night in the wrestling business, and I will be back up here with another edition of This Day in History very, very, very soon, because there's one day that everybody wants me to do, and I promise I will. Until next time, peace.